If you're looking for a place to hang out, figure out where you can take the next step in your dairy farming business, then you're in the right spot. Welcome to the High Performance Herd podcast. Here we will inform you what you can do today to future-proof your business for tomorrow. A big thanks to our sponsors Fonterra, IDEX, Kuru Diagnostics, TasHerd, Tasmanian Dairy Trust, Zoetis, NHIA, Datamars. I'm your host, Andrew Savage. Enjoy this episode of the High Performance Herd podcast wherever you may be listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, and jump on our Facebook group, the High Performance Herd Project. Today in the High Performance Herd studio, I have Peter Thurn from Datagene. Hi Peter, welcome to the High Performance Herd Project, and tell us something about yourself that most people don't know.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. It's probably maybe a couple of things. When I'm not working at Datagene, I breed budgerigars, breed exhibition budgerigars, and that's probably my little breeding outlet outside of work. So I have probably about 250 of them at the moment, and we'll start breeding again sometime around May, and hopefully breed around 200 this year. So that kind of keeps me busy on the weekends when I'm mucking around with them and judging shows and going to shows and that sort of thing. So and the other thing is I can see it over my shoulder. I think I've just started to learn the bass. So I'm not very good, and I'm not likely. And I'm not likely to be very good either, but it's good to stretch the mind.
Oh, definitely. No, I think an escape, it's a form of meditation in some ways. I actually play the trombone, have done for years off and on. And it's good. And it's great to have a hobby. And for some maybe Kiwis, and there's the odd European in that here, what is a budgerigar? Because it sounds like it could be like a bird from Australia, or I'm picking it's not.
Look, it is a bird from Australia. It's a gregarious little bird that lives in very large flocks in the interior. They're described as a live fast, die young species. So they kind of ebb and flow with the season and kind of the quality of the season. So in tough seasons, when there's not a lot of seed around, because they feed on grass seed, well, then there's a decline in the population, and then in a good year they'll multiply very rapidly. So that's what they are. Some people call them parakeets. John Gould, the naturalist, took some to England, I reckon in the 1800s, and there's quite a big budgerigar fraternity now in England and the UK, and they've developed an exhibition budgerigar that looks nothing like the one you would find out in the arid regions. It's probably twice as big, and the feathers 3 times as long, and they wouldn't last out there, but they look attractive.
There you go. I've learned something I think we probably all have today. And I guess on the subject of breeding, you work for Datagene, which is the Australian, herd improvement organisation or genetic evaluation organisation. Can you just, for those of us who aren't familiar, give us just a quick rundown on Datagene and how does it work?
Yep. So Datagene was formed in 2016, and it kind of morphed out of what was there previously called a group called ADHIS, so the Australian Dairy Herd Improvement Scheme. So Datagene is a not-for-profit, and it has a number of members or owners, and we're effectively owned by industry. So, the big stakeholders in Datagene are the likes of Dairy Australia, National Herd Improvement Association, Australian dairy farmers, and then all of the breeding companies, like ABS, Genetics Australia, those guys, all the members. You'll find that some of the semen resellers will be members. We've got vet groups that are members. So anyone that has an interest in that space can be a member of Datagene. And we're basically there. Our primary function is creating breeding values, and kind of working in that space where nobody else is working. So we try and, if there's other things on the side, they're the gaps we're trying to fill. We support the herd test side of the industry to keep that going. And obviously there's, genomics these days as well, which is a big part of what we do. And we create the genomic breeding values as well as the conventional breeding values that people would have been used to for years and years.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess on that topic of breeding values, and a lot of countries, New Zealand and Ireland, the UK, have all had their own sense of direction around breeding values, usually driven by farmer and consumer. What has been the focus over recent years for Datagene, and how do you think this is changing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we've gone through a number of, I suppose, phases or iterations over the years, and back sort of 10 years ago, there was the big push on fertility and the fact that we needed to correct the effects of that production focus that we had for many years, where we weren't looking at fertility and we saw a decline in fertility. So there was a lot of emphasis on that. And then probably, at a similar time, or even maybe a little before that move to having total performance indexes, which ours is known as the BPI, or the Balanced Performance Index. So, that allowed people to probably make some better, more balanced decisions. And it also allowed traits that maybe weren't getting a lot of selection pressure at farm level to be actually dragged along, because if people were selecting bulls using the total index, those other traits got dragged along. So traits like feed efficiency and that sort of thing, we're making steady gains in that trait, even though there may not necessarily be a lot of people directly selecting for it. So, fertility was probably the big one. And then, the addition of health traits becomes fairly important, and we're probably looking to add more and more health traits as we go on. Heat tolerance is a biggie. The work around heat tolerance was, I think, quite seminal in some ways. It was, heat tolerance is an interesting one because, unlike herd tests, unlike milk production, for example, you don't have those phenotypes necessarily sitting on farm. You can't go and sort of grab a heat tolerance breeding, measurement on farm. But what you can do is you can look at proxies for heat tolerance. So you can look at production decline and then marry that production decline up with the weather in the area, or and so you can marry those two things together and create a phenotype. And then you've got the beauty of genomics. So you genomically evaluate those cows, and then you relate that genomics back to the phenotype you've created out of the weather record and the milk production drop, and all of a sudden you've got a breeding value that you can apply broadly across the population. So it's kind of, those sorts of traits are becoming the next step forward, and we're learning of ways where we don't need to have a phenotype on every animal in the country to be able to create these breeding values and make progress. And then probably the latest thing for us in terms of breeding values is the sustainability index. So that's taking an emissions intensity approach. So looking at reducing the amount of carbon or methane per kilogram of productive output. So per kilo protein, per kilo fat, per litre of milk. So we're trying to produce more product effectively for the same amount of methane or carbon, so that we're diluting the amount of carbon per unit of output. So that's probably the next big thing for us. We only released that late last year. It's had a little bit of uptake and a bit of interest, but I think it's a polarizing space. I think when you start talking about climate change, and some people are well and truly boots and all in, some are sitting back and waiting, and some are not quite there yet. So, or may never get there, but that's fine. We've got plenty of tools for them to use to breed better cows too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, each to their own, I guess, in some elements, and you're providing people with the tools quite interested around the heat tolerance one, and part of the high performance herd project. One of our vets has looked at the collar data, rumination, and overlaying that with the daily temperature at the farm, and seeing some quite interesting outputs in relation to cows panting and heat, and how's that is affecting production. And I guess that's going to be another prong in our well, another tool under our belt, isn't it? And are you seeing a bit around collars as well, and maybe some of that starting to enter into the phenotypical stuff?
Yeah, I think collar data is kind of the next frontier. We've got a big project just about to commence around what we're calling data ingestion. So it's all about getting those non-traditional forms of data into our central data repository so that we can make better use of it, but also in some ways so we can help farmers marry up some of that data on their farm, because in a lot of cases, not all those systems are standalone systems on farm, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. So sometimes, if it goes into one point, there's the opportunity for the farmer to marry that data up and make better use of it. But I think there's a world of stuff in collar data. There's a world of stuff sitting in a lot of vet practices computers, like herd fertility data and those sort of things. There's data sitting in farm software systems that is not making it through to the central data repository. So the more data from those, what we kind of refer to as non-traditional sources, so outside of herd reporting and classification and those sort of things, the more of that data we can get in, the more products we can create, the useful products we can create for farmers, find better solutions for them, maybe even create some new phenotypes to create some genomic breeding values.
Yeah, that's fantastic. This is probably quite foreign, what you're saying. To a lot of New Zealand farmers have a system called Minder, where for probably north of 100 years, I think that all data has been sent somehow, first by paper and then maybe by fax and now via the internet into a central system. And I know a lot of visitors come here and are quite surprised at the, I guess, disjointed nature of where information is sitting, but in some ways, potentially in the future, that might put you at an advantage, because like you're saying, we can take data from all different points at some stage. I guess in looking at farmers on the ground, how have you seen farmers using your breeding values on farm? There's tools that you provide that allow farmers to make those decisions around breeding and what bulls they select.
Yeah, so annually we monitor our genetic progress, and you can see, and the best indicator for that is the cows. I mean, we see fantastic genetic progress when we look at the bulls, and that's all obviously controlled predominantly by the breeding companies. And we know that they're sort of pushing hard on a range of traits. They're making good progress. To understand what our true impact is, it's what's happening on farm, and we're seeing nice changes, especially around traits like fertility, but at the same time without a sacrifice in production. Traits that are traits like mastitis resistance are sort of starting to move forward. So we see some nice upward trends in cow ABVs, and we know from any amount of studies that you see an upward trend in a breeding value and a population, you're going to have a resulting effect in the actual performance of the population.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you also can generate a genetic progress report, is that right? That farmers can actually track over time how their genes or genetic capabilities.
How their herd's tracking, and looking at progress, because sometimes, especially in instances where a farmer might kind of abdicate his breeding decisions to somebody else, sometimes they lose track of them, of where they're heading, because the advisor or whoever it might be might have some different ideas, and we've often seen cases where herds have flatlined because of advice, and then when the farmer sees that, they sort of go, "Oh, gee, that's not where I thought I was heading," So the genetic progress report's a good tool to keep tabs on where you're heading.
That's right. Yeah, give the farmer control potentially, and sometimes there's a fair bit of commission involved in semen sales, and I don't want to. And I can say that because
I'm not going there.
but again,
I've been there before, and I'm not going there now.
But it is about the farmer definitely taking control of that. It's a long-term exercise, and it's kind of like when you look at yourself in the mirror every day, and maybe you don't see yourself putting on weight or losing it, but if you can actually go back and look or set a clear goal, because you maybe do from year to year get busy and maybe sort of lose sight of that a little bit.
Look, I think farmers think that it's a difficult task, and selecting bulls, and ultimately it is so easy, and you only need to do it once or twice a year, and you don't need a lot of bulls. You probably only need 5 or 6. Now with genomics, I used to say you could probably get away with 5, in the pre-genomic era. These days you might want maybe 6 or 7, so you can sort of spread the risk across a few more genomic bulls. If 2 of those were daughter-proven bulls and 5 of those were genomic bulls, that's probably not a bad mix. And then, select them on the index that works for you. The BPI or our health-weighted index is another one, for guys that are a bit more conscious about, fertility and other health traits, or the sustainability index. And then just go through and pick bulls that have some characteristics that you might want to change in your herd. Take you half an hour max, especially if you use something like the Good Bulls Guide. The bulls are all there. You can get it in electronic form, you get it in paper form, and half an hour and the job's done.
I love it.
Or the other option is, the Good Bulls app is another tool that we've got, and you can actually create lists of bulls within the app. When you apply filters and that sort of thing, create lists of bulls, and bingo, there it's all there on your phone. Send that off to your semen guy.
That's right. It's a fantastic tool, the book. And if any listener hasn't had a look, even if you're in New Zealand or where you are in Europe, you can probably sneak on and have a look at that too. I guess I'm not sure, but it's a fantastic tool.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it gives the farmer back that element of control, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, that's exactly right. Your herd is a very, it's probably the second biggest asset behind the land itself. So, why not remain in control of that? And I guess talking about, you talk about genomic teams and proven bulls. Australia was a very early adopter of genomics, especially in the female space. It's really only just starting to creep into New Zealand and other places now. They've used it on the male side for quite a few years, but not so much female. I'm not sure if that was because of a reasonably low uptake in herd recording or giving you the ability to receive so much more data. How are you seeing it? How are you seeing farmers adopt genomics? Are you seeing a big increase and how they're using it?
Yeah, year on year, it's usage is definitely increasing, and I think we're now starting to get a little bit more of it's starting to be used as part of a much more integrated approach to breeding on farms. So it's primarily being used as a selection tool, and I think there's still plenty of scope in terms of getting more value out of genomics, but primarily being used as a selection tool to work out which cows to breed to what, which heifers maybe to cull, that sort of thing. And we're now starting to see these more well thought out programs where guys are sort of using genomics combined with sex semen. So if you're in an area where you can export, you might only need to breed the top 20-25% of your herd plus your heifers to get your replacements using sex semen. Or you go down the beef path, and just breed that top part of your herd, breed your replacements, everything else gets beef, and I think we'll see an emerging dairy beef industry kicking out of this, as we need to deal with bobby calves and those sort of things, you'll start to see a lot more people going down this path where they say, right, I need to identify, better identify the cows I want to breed to beef. And genomics is going to be a tool that allows them to do that. And we really are starting to see a lot more of that sort of application of genomics. And then we haven't even got into the mating side yet. I don't think there's a few companies starting to head down that path, but I don't think we're very far advanced in terms of using it to determine maybe what the best animal or what the best mate is for that cow and that sort of thing. And especially from an inbreeding perspective, I think that could be really useful.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. And there was a bit of talk around this at the dairy conference too. And the process is potentially forcing a farmer's hand that every animal has to enter the food chain. So bobby calves be a thing of the past. So I guess it'd be really powerful to be able to make some selection process around that.
Oh, definitely. You don't want to be, sometimes you've got to breed your best cow to beef because, she's on a third in SEM or something like that. And you just want to get her in calf. But I think we will start to see a more targeted approach in that area where people are using genomics to identify, not just the keepers within the herd, but the cows to breed the next generation, and then making some solid decisions around who's going to get beef and who's not going to contribute to the future of the genetic future of the herd.
Yeah, and your data ingestion project with Datagene, is a large scale project. But do you get the sense that maybe individual farms will have to have their own data ingestion type system to bring collar information, genomic information, herd test data, all of these different points into one spot so they can try and make these decisions?
Look, I think so, but hopefully our project will kind of facilitate that a bit too. So, they'll be able to maybe draw some of that data from a central point, even though they might have it sitting on the same computer on their farm, but they haven't got the ability to marry it together. Or it might be some of it might be sitting on here, some on the computer, and we need to find a way of joining that data up. So I'd like to think that our project might facilitate that. But yeah, I think that's a real big challenge on farmers, getting these systems to talk to each other so that you can get maximum benefit out of them.
I think you're bang on, and it's the next step we can take. Talking about genomics, there's been challenges, I guess, historically. I've heard it likened to having a cake in front of you and then having to pick the recipe. And I'm talking about crossbred cows and genomics. It's been very easy in the purebred space. I understand you've been doing some work on crossbreds and maybe how they can too benefit from genomics maybe a bit better.
Yeah, it's been one of the, it's kind of been one of the gaps for us. Because we run a breeding value system that's run within breed, or more to the point, and we express our breeding values within breed. We kind of run them all together as, a crossbreed, but then when we express the breeding values, we split them up into the individual breed bases. So that means in this country, and probably most countries with the exception of New Zealand, you can't compare directly breeding value for a Holstein cow and a Jersey cow. Or, you might have a crossbred cow that's side by a Holstein bull. She'll go into the Holstein analysis. If you've got one side by a Jersey bull, she'll go into the Jersey analysis, and you can't compare them. So what we've done is we've created what we're calling a within herd ranking tool. And the aim is to launch that in April with our April ABB release. And the idea is that it kind of creates a breeding value equivalent to a PI, you could say. So the average cow for a range of traits, I think there's quite a range of traits and our key indices. The average cow in your herd will be 100, irrespective of what breed she is for that trait. So if it's fertility, your average cow is 100. Your good cows are going to be 3 standard deviations better than that, and we're running a standard deviation at 10, so they're going to be around 130. And the bad ones are going to be down around 70. And so you'll be able to compare within your herd, and you won't be able to use these numbers to compare to your neighbour's herd because we're creating a base for your herd, but it'll tell you exactly what your average cow is, what your good cows are, what your bad cows are, for a range of traits. And then you can basically, use things like Excel or whatever it might be to run some filters and identify cows for the key traits that push your buttons, that are the best performers and the worst performers. So it kind of overcomes that problem we've got at the moment of not being able to compare cows, because within your herd, you'll be able to compare every cow, irrespective of breed, and then start to make some much more objective decisions using the genomic data.
Yeah, that'd be a really handy tool. And that, like you said just then, it's purely a genomic measure at this stage.
Pretty much, although, I think you'll get more benefit out of it if you're using genomics, because the reliability of the prediction is going to be a lot higher. If you're not using genomics and you're just looking at parent averages, you're going to make a lot of blues.
That's right.
So, I would encourage people to get in and genomically test to create to get a better set of data to work with, and that'll be available on our DataVat website portal. It'll be sitting there as a tool where your herd will come up and you'll be able to download your within herd rankings.
Oh, that's excellent. There's a fair bit going on. You're a busy man, or it's a busy team of people, isn't it? So, yeah.
There's always something.
There always will be too. It's been a really, you've given us a really cool, I guess, oversight of Datagene, and in particular, I guess, breeding values and tools for farmers. What's sort of one key takeaway, I guess, you would have for farmers around breeding and breeding values and the tools that Datagene has to offer?
Look, what I'd say, I'd go back to where I was before around bull selection, and say just keep it simple. There's tools there to make it easy for you. There's a lot of benefit to genomic testing, especially when it's combined with sex semen. And I think in that space, sex semen has become the enabler. If you didn't have sex semen, it'd be difficult to extract the value out of genomic testing, because most of the time in the pre-sex semen days, we were struggling to get enough replacements. Your 6 weeks of AI, if you got your 25% replacements, you're probably doing really well. Now with sex semen, you can bang out any number of heifers. And so it's become the real enabler then or creates the problem of saying, well, now I need to work out who the best ones are. My advice would be hook into genomics, keep your bull selection simple, and then use the tools, whether it's the within herd ranking tool or just, utilizing the genomic breeding value results to make some smarter decisions on your farm and get the most out of your breeding.
No, that's great advice. You're right. You don't need to go alone. The tools are there to be used, and that's what it's there for. So I really appreciate you coming in and having a chat to us this afternoon. What is it? Yeah, it's still mornings. And really appreciate your time, and we'll catch up with you at the Herd 23 conference in Bendigo. It looks like a good gig too.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Cool. Thanks very much.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the High Performance Herd podcast. Thanks to the sponsors, Fonterra, IDEX, Courier Diagnostics, TasHerd, the Tasmanian Dairy Trust, Zoetis, NHIA, Datamars. Feel free to subscribe and review the podcast. Share it with your friends. The more, the merrier. Jump on Facebook, search the High Performance Herd Project, and you're very welcome to join the High Performance Herd private Facebook group. If you want to see a video of this podcast, jump on YouTube or www.highperformanceherd.com, where you'll see a link to these sponsors for more information on the High Performance Herd Project, which is a real-life dairy farm, spring block calving right here in Tassie. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.